Okie doke. So any questions from your discussions during lunch? Any questions? Any questions? Yeah.
I had a question for you. You said that when you first came in contact with karma, you just loved it. You felt like really energized by it.
Well, it grabbed me, yeah. Yeah.
Because, and I wondered how that functioned for you. Just like what you tell how.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, what are the experiential implications of having this philosophical view called karma?
Yes.
As I mentioned before, it's that we're in control. We're the one who creates our own experiences. That's the thing that I found very powerful. And then what's the implication of that? So, okay, the implication, it seems to me, we mightn't think it like this, but if you analyse it, it makes sense. If the idea that my parents, for example, are the cause of who I am, they're the cause of my depression, they're the cause of my anger, they're the cause of my suffering, but they're also the cause of my happiness, but we don't seem to think about that one too much. And that, I think, we look into our minds. This is a very deep assumption we have. And not just our family and our parents, but then our assumption is that our happiness and suffering come from that boyfriend, come from the next door neighbour, come from the boss. I mean, do you agree with that? We tend to think why we're happy is because nice things happen, and why we suffer is because bad things happen. Do you think that?
Right, yeah, sure.
It's a deep assumption, isn't it? Well, Buddha says that's not the main reason. The main reason is your own past actions. So when you take that, and you start to realise that you are the cause of your suffering and you are the cause of your happiness, then you can be in control of it and change it. That's the essence of it. That's the point. That's the essence of it. The words are simple. I mean, because if we look into our minds, we see how deeply ingrained, how utterly addicted we are to the other view, that I'm this innocent victim who didn't ask to get born, therefore it's not my fault. And that view is the view of ego, which causes suffering and misery and not fair and poor me and victim, and it's not, and everybody else has to change, then I'll be better. Is it not true? I mean, if the weather's lousy, you feel miserable. You assume that the weather's the cause of your suffering. Right there. It's automatic. Therefore, we don't ever assume that I can change my mind and be happy regardless of the weather. It just doesn't occur to us. We've got to rely on the weather to make us happy. We have to rely on the boyfriend to be kind to us. Have to rely on the food to be the right food. I mean, is this not just taken as a given?
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, you're always seeking those things out.
Precisely. Buddha says, change your mind instead, baby. That's what he's saying. Forget karma. He's just saying, if you change your mind, you can be happy regardless. It's easy to say the words, but this is the essence of the whole Buddhist approach. It doesn't mean we should give up handsome boyfriends and money in the bank. No, don't give it up. But be happy, not because you've got money in the bank. Be happy because you can change your mind and be content with what you've got. And then you can be a multi-millionaire and still be content. And if you're poor, you'll still be content. Either way, win-win. It's a simple way of saying it. Factoring in that our own mind and our views now determine how we see things, therefore how we're happy or suffering. And the long-term view of who I am and come into this world is because of my own past actions. So I'm the source of my own reality, and I can be the source of my future reality. It's up to me, in other words. That's the essence of it. I'm not saying that other people don't have that view, even though they think their mother made them. But what I'm saying is that's the implication of the Buddhist view of karma and his view of the mind. That's the essence of it. That's the essence of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I see that historically that would be fighting things like caste system and stuff like that, where things are kind of fixed if you just are born into a situation that you can't get out of.
That's where I think the philosophical view of karma is on the basis, is the root of that, but then I'd say it's a misinterpretation of that view, and that's how it can get messed up. So there can be a philosophy that's a valid philosophy, but can be misinterpreted. So I think there's the view of a creator is an amazing view. And I think you can live a blissful life if you live it according to it validly. It can bring happiness. But look at the way people misuse that philosophy and use it to murder others and be terrorists, all saying in the name of God. So, a philosophy doesn't mean everyone's going to be happy because of it. But if you misuse it or not hear it properly, it's a way of putting that also. Do you understand what I mean? That's the essence of it. What else? Okay. Well, then we should ask the question, given that's the title of the teaching, what has it got to do with loosening the grip of ego? How does that work? What's that got to do? How's that? Well, I think already by what I'm saying, it's kind of implied. But to understand it, to unpack this, again, it's really the same question. What's your name?
Brent.
Brent. look at Brent's question and look at and start to unpack all the assumptions that we have that are in our mind, and I mean assumptions, which implies we don't even notice. You know. So the way Buddhism talking about ego, it's not. We have a sort of a very cliched way we use the word, and everybody uses it differently. And it's just sort of come up. I don't know who first started using it in English. It's one of those fancy Greek words. It means I. It's Greek for I, for God's sake. It just sounds fancy because it's Greek. I mean, you know, we'd love to use Greek and it makes it sound better or something. I mean, look at all the Greek words we've got, you know. And somehow we think it makes it fancy because Greek's old. You understand? This fancy word, this just means ego, I. This means I. Big deal, you know. So we use it in all sorts of ways, don't we? So when we say she's got a big ego, we mean, you know, she's rough and rude and aggressive and dominates people. We mean that by big ego. It's not really the way Buddha means it at all. So to understand what he means by ego and to understand how, let's say, using the view of karma as a basis, as a way you interpret your life, because that's what it means, not just, oh yeah, I believe in karma. And this is, again, an important point. You would never say, oh, I believe in botany. You wouldn't say it, you'd be laughed at. So you might know that botany does exist, and you must know that lots of people know botany, and then you also know the point of it, the implication of knowing botany, the implication of using the view of botany is that it helps you get a garden. Isn't it? If you just say, I believe in botany, what good is it? I'm happy you believe in it. It does work. But what is the point unless you see the experiential implication of it? And that's the point here. But we don't see that. I believe in God. But what's the implication of that? Well, it's pretty powerful. He's your boss. He's your creator. You better have some respect and live according to his rules, please. You can't just say, I believe in God and then do something what God says not to do. You're schizophrenic. Are you sort of hearing me? Yeah. If you say, I believe in botany, and then you start putting poison in your garden and wonder why a tree doesn't come. You can't say you believe in botany but not use it. It's no point. But that's how we think of belief. This thing you sort of plonk on top of yourself. It's got to have an implication. It's got to have an action. So the Buddha's saying, this view of the mind in Buddhism, like I'm saying before, you know, we have these different states. There are thousands of states of mind. It's pretty obvious. We know that our mind is non-stop from the second we wake up until we go to sleep. It's just these thoughts are just raging on. We don't pay attention to 99.9% of them. But it's on autopilot, you know. So Buddha's deal is because what goes on in the mind is the source, even just now, of happiness and suffering, not to mention the source of what we then choose to do that sows seeds that will produce our future happiness and suffering. This is the point that we have to learn to know the mind. You can't just say, I believe in them, I believe my mind is not physical, I believe in karma. I don't care you believe in it. It's useless. It's a wasting your breath to say it. If you say you like the view of karma, then you have to learn it. You say you like botany, you have to learn it and apply it. And you get a garden. So if you say, you know, you're a Buddhist, you like the view of karma, you better learn to know the theories. Start with the theories. And then you understand Buddha's view of the mind, because Buddha's view of the mind, that it's not physical and all that, it implies karma. They're not separate things. Because this consciousness, Buddha would say, is not physical. It didn't begin in your mother's womb. He says that whatever you think and do and say produces your future, and whatever you're experiencing is the result of your past. In past meaning before this life, after this life. Which of course is such a cosmic concept to us. Of course it is. So you decide to become a Buddhist like me. I've chosen to take it on board as my working hypothesis. Just like if you start, like Wolfgang, to start learning acupuncture, you take it as your working hypothesis. So you have to learn the theories. So the theory about the mind, Buddha's view about the mind is it's not physical, doesn't come from mummy daddy, doesn't come from a creator, goes to much more subtle levels than the grosser level that we live at. And finally it has this marvellous potential. And it goes back, and continues on. And then whatever you think and do and say programs it. Whatever you think and do and say programs it. Whatever you think and do and say leaves seeds in it that ripen in the future as your type of rebirth, your tendencies, your experiences, and the environmental result. And there's all this. It's all dealt with in immense subtlety and depth in all the literature. All I can do is just say the principles here, So, the Buddha's simple view is that what's called a negative state of mind, which then produces a negative action with the body and speech, which by definition is usually first and foremost an action that harms another, will program your mind with negative seeds that will then ripen as your suffering, a type of rebirth, a tendency, an experience, and the environmental result. So therefore, because I don't want suffering in the future and I do want happiness, I'd better learn to know what my mind is, know what a negative thought is as opposed to a positive one, because that's what underpins my actions, and start to, first of all, change my behaviour, my body and speech actions, and then start to change my mind. And then to want to think and do and say actions that are called virtuous or valid or reasonable or moral or positive, which are actions that I do that are impelled by a positive thought, a positive state of mind that leaves seeds in my mind that will ripen in the future as my happy rebirth, good tendencies, happy experiences, happy environmental result. The principle is just like botany. You sow good seeds, you get rose trees. You get bushes, you get flowers, you get veggies, you get oak trees. You refrain from sowing the weeds so you don't get weeds. It's just a simple principle. It's a simple analogy. It's hardly complicated. We're just not used to thinking of morality and goodness like this, that's all. We think of it as a set of rules that someone imposes upon us who will then judge us and who will reward us or punish us. That's how we think about it. Like roses are the result of your good behaviour and someone will reward you with roses in the future. No, your own behaviour gets you roses. You create the roses, baby. You don't play the piano and then Bach comes along and injects music into you and rewards you by being like him. No, it's a natural result that you play piano because you practice. It's hardly rocket science. So if that's the case, I better know my mind. I better know, first of all, junior school entry level is, don't worry about your mind here, that's high school. Buddha says, refrain from doing a few negative actions that are ones that are motivated by a negative state of mind, like we used before. And at least stop sowing new seeds in your mind. This is the first level. And then you get ahead of the game a little bit. Now you've got to start cleaning up the seeds you've already planted and pull them out before they ripen as further suffering. So it's a practical approach. Then you can go to high school and learn about the delusions that are the ones that impel us to do the dumb actions with our body and speech, and learn to identify them and distinguish them from the positive states of mind. But the trouble is here, like a big soup, they're all mixed together. So how can understanding karma and understanding your mind help loosen the grip of the painful state of, Buddha calls it ego grasping? Well, if we look into the mind, we're going to observe there are three categories of states of mind, and this model is coming from these Hindus, amazing, hundreds of, thousands of years ago, and then articulated and by the Buddhist view. So, like I like to say, within the negative ones and the positive ones, and this is something that we don't talk in our culture. It sounds so simplistic and it sounds very moralistic to say you've got negative thoughts and positive thoughts. In psychology, we would not like to go there. That sounds like you're judging somebody. We're very cautious, But it's being a bit, in my opinion, nihilistic. In just the same way that you will say when you're playing the piano, you play the wrong note or the right note. You're not going to go kill yourself because you play the wrong note. And you don't be scared and say, well, Bach really doesn't mean F major. He really means something else. Then you'll never be able to play the piano. You don't get freaked out because you when the recipe says you've got to put exactly 1 teaspoon of sugar in. You don't have a panic attack and think, well, I'll put 2 spoons of sugar, I'll go to hell. You know that you need to have correct instructions, and if it says sugar, you don't mean salt. Oh, you're allowed to put salt, it's okay. That's how we are with psychology, but that's like babies, Oh, it's all right to be angry, don't say it's negative, you might get guilty. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Yeah. We're little children, Excuse me, Buddha would define anger very specifically and say to mother, that'll break your heart, baby, not to mention it cause you to harm others. So it's just like, you've got to identify this poison there and say, oh, it's all right, you're allowed to eat poison. You don't want to feel guilty. Yes, you're allowed to eat poison, it's all right. It's nonsense, utter nonsense. But we're such infants when it comes to emotional stuff. Well, Buddha's the same way. He will say, you got to have 1 teaspoon of sugar in a cake, and you can't put poison, you've got to put, salt. Then he's being he's precise in that same way about what defines a negative state of mind and what defines a positive one. We've got to grow up, Negative meaning what? It's one that'll cause you suffering, honey. And the one that'll cause you to harm others. That's called ethics. We understand ethics. So if that's the trait, we better understand what he means by a negative state of mind, which is what impels a negative action, like we said before. Or a virtuous state of mind, compassion, impelling the action to save the mouse. So we'd identify the difference between a positive state of mind, a virtuous one, which is a source of happiness, and which benefits others, and a negative one, which is the source of my pain, and which causes me to harm others. It's very simple. Don't get all wishy-washy about it. The same precision and clarity and depth of analysis we know we need just to make a cake is what Buddha demands we use to get clear about our minds, so we can sort out learning to be in control of our lives and doing and saying and thinking the things that will ripen in the future as my happiness, and refraining from doing and saying and thinking things that will ripen as suffering in the future. It's practical. It's practical. It's practical. It's not moralistic. So that's very hard for us to hear this. So we have to identify the difference between the negative and the positive states. So, as we know, from the Buddhist model, let's look at the negative ones. It is complex. The way they're described in the text is enormously complex. But we can get a look at the very basic ones, which are pretty fundamental and which go to, and which can be very profound when we understand them, in helping us understand our minds. So the many synonyms in Buddhist psychology for these unhappy states of mind. The one that's commonly used in the Buddhist literature, which you'll see in the teachings if you read it, is a very medieval phrase, probably pre-medieval, coming from India, called affliction. Yes, pre-medieval, it's Indian. Affliction. We understand it, but it's a very curious word. We don't use it in daily life, I don't think. Affliction. That's the definition. The definition of an affliction. Let's look. What does our dictionary say? Affliction. Affliction. It's kind of really, I never use it, ever. It's one of the key terms for the unhappy states of mind. There are various synonyms. That's the main one that's used. Let's look.
Something that causes pain or suffering.
There you go. Something that causes pain or suffering. Affliction. Define affliction. There you go. A state of pain. It says here it's a state. Okay, two things. It's a noun. It's a state of pain, distress, or misery, or it's a cause of mental or bodily pain. So you're afflicted with sickness, so you then suffer. So then the use of it here then is directly related to the state of mind, all the neurotic ones. So I think Buddha would have liked another Greek word again, right? He would have liked the term neurosis. It's a very loose word, loosely used. But it's for these states of mind, the Buddha said, are really kind of, they've got various characteristics, these unhappy ones, these neurotic ones, these negative ones, these afflicted ones. One, and this is one of the synonyms, one is that they're very disturbing. Right there, the very having of it. Disturbing emotion, disturbing state of mind. It's one of its characteristics. Another one of these afflictions, another characteristic, and this is identified, indicated by another term that's not really a noun in Buddhist psychology. It's more like a verb, but it's not wrong. It's one of the commonest terms. Lama Yeshe certainly would always use it. He never used the word affliction. I've just discovered, editing his teachings, and I know I never use the word affliction, just out of interest. I don't. His Holiness is a typical one they use. But it's the word delusion. And this is a very fascinating one. Delusions. When we get this word, you will be bullseye with understanding why we suffer, according to Buddha. So there's a hierarchy. I like to say it this way. Another Greek word. Look at us, all our fancy words, Buddha doesn't use the term hierarchy. They didn't speak Greek back then. Maybe it is Greek, isn't it? Yeah. So, okay, the root, they always refer to it as the root affliction, or the root disturbing state of mind, or the root neurosis, or the root delusion. Obviously, the meaning is obvious. It's the one that's the deepest, most primordial. That's called, simply, in Tibetan, ma-rigpa, unawareness. So initially this is really abstract, so we have to listen and think about it, Another word for that is ignorance. So regular ignorance, we say, oh, she's very ignorant. We mean either very stupid or doesn't know many things, but usually it's kind of with very thick mind and very deluded thoughts, So ignorant is a really practical word, very simple. Unawareness, ma-rigpa. So, but it's very specific. Of course, logically, in this model of the mind. So this ma-rigpa, this ignorance, specifically is referring to the not knowing of how things exist. This is the one finally, the not knowing of how things exist. Buddha says we are totally ignorant of how things exist. We are blinded from seeing how things exist in reality. And he's talking here finally. He's talking here ultimately. He's talking about finally seeing how things exist, leading to the ultimate wisdom of seeing how things exist. So you might know from studying Buddhist philosophy that there's a shorthand term for that, and that's called understanding emptiness. So it's got, it's in the title. We'll see if we go there, but leave it for now. Okay, so this ego grasping is not, this ignorance is colloquial, it's very tasty. It's known as ego grasping, which is really tasty. I grasping, self grasping. So this ignorance, it's kind of like double trouble. Regular ignorance is really easy to fix. If you say to me, what is that? And I'll go, I don't know. Well, that's ignorance. But it's easy to fix. There's a hole in my mind and you can fill it up with the truth. You say, Robina, it's an iPad. You get me? It's easy to fix, isn't it? And I think if that was the ignorance we had, that we could get enlightened, I'd say, in a couple of years. I'm serious. Because we're very clever. We learn a lot. We can fill our mind with a lot of amazing information very quickly. Do you understand? But the trouble is, this ignorance it's got this extra level. So not only do I not know the truth, that it's an iPad, I think it's a Samsung. Keep it simple. I would never have a Samsung, I promise. By the way, so here's the simple example. So not only do you not know the truth, you believe in a lie. See, that's really double trouble, isn't it? That's serious. And not only that, but you're super attached to believing that you're right. You with me? So that's why we suffer so badly, Buddha says. He is saying this ego grasping is like an ignorance in there that literally causes us to be as blind as bats, that prevents us from seeing, and don't forget these words for now, ultimate reality, how things are finally. Not only do we not know how things exist, we have made up a complete fantasy that's exactly the opposite of the truth. And we have been believing in it for eons, he says. Just hear the words, okay? This is why it is so hard to change our mind. So the function of ego grasping, that word grasping, is exactly conveying the way it works. So, it's very interesting. It's like Mr. Darwin, I think. Wasn't it Mr. Darwin who came up with instinct for survival? Isn't that one of Mr. Darwin's things? By observing animals and humans, he's observed this thing that he identified as instinct for survival, such that when you're floating along, the lion's going along all nice and happy, and then suddenly it gets attacked, then this rises up, doesn't it? And then we've identified it as this powerful fear that then is necessary, that causes the lion to do what it does to protect itself and its babies and get the hell out of danger. Now, that it would seem a fairly reasonable presentation. Look what happens. I mean, we can see that it's a particular identification of the way we behave when things then things go wrong. You're floating along on the road, driving along, listening to your music on the thing, feeling that everything's wonderful, and then suddenly the car leaps in front of you and smashes into you practically. We all know that this sleeping lion arises, an absolute panic arises, doesn't it? Fear comes, the heart beats faster, and then naturally you try to then think that that's got to help you know what to do to get out of the way. Do we agree with that? That's generally speaking how we understand it, you know? Well, Buddha is very interesting. He says, nah. Ego grasping, fear arising, is actually a symptom of complete distress and neurosis, and it completely makes you an utterly idiot. It makes you choose all the wrong things to do. You practically have a panic attack, and it's a miracle you survive at all. Please hear me. So, there's this lovely story about Lama Zopa Rinpoche. He was recognized when he was a little boy as the reincarnation of a previous yogi. Okay, we're taking this model here we're describing of continuity of consciousness, reincarnation, blah, blah, blah. So all these great meditators, and this is very much the Vajrayana system in Buddhism, as we know, that these great yogis can have done all the work of accessing this subtle level of their mind, completely controlling their mind. They see the past, they see the future. They're doing this job of ridding the mind of the rubbish. They're doing this job of seeing reality as it is. All this job that we're discussing here, they're doing it deadly seriously. And so he was at this yogi in the past, up the Sherpa up in the mountains, right? He was said to be this yogi. There was this yogi up in the mountains called Kunsang Yeshe, and he lived in this little cave, and he was known as the Laudo Lama. Well, Laudo, it seems, it means radishes or something. I forget. And apparently this yogi, he was a regular guy in his past life. He would, go back and forth to Tibet selling salt or whatever they do, these Sherpas. And then he was a meditator. So he spent the last 20 or 30 years of his life in this little cave. Well, it used to be where they stored the radishes. So he said that Guru Rinpoche gave it to him. So he pulled the radishes out and moved in, basically. Do you understand? So he became known as the Radish Lama, something like that. Do you understand? So he spent like 20, 30 years, and he developed this relationship with the locals. They come and serve him and look after him. He became their teacher, blah, blah, blah. That's their style, that's their trip. So he died. Well, then, given this system, you can learn to die with complete control. They can go through this process of death without losing the plot. They then can know exactly where they're going to get reborn. They choose their rebirth. All of this is all part of this big system, okay? So, when this little tiny new baby got born, little baby called Zopa, he wasn't called Zopa then, he was called something else, but I don't know what his name was. So let's call him Zopa. So he had a sister who was 6 at the time, and his mummy. His daddy was alive, and I think his daddy died soon after. But the way the stories go, according to the sister, from the time he could crawl, mummy's out the door, Zopa's off. They always find him crawling up the mountain to where they know Laudo Cave is, right? So they drag him home. From the time he can talk, he's walking up the hill. Come home. No, that is my home. So he showed all the signs of saying that he was the reincarnation of the Laudo Lama. He knew all his benefactors' names. He'd talk about them. He'd say they were coming to puja. He seemed to be clairvoyant. He seemed to be clearly remembering who he was, and he wanted to get on with the job. So, okay, take or leave this as you wish. I'm just telling you the story. This is not an uncommon story. So, and he used to play, when he played games, he always played the role of the Lama. He'd make mud pie dorjis and mud pie bells and mud pie tormas. He'd have pujas, and he would announce all his benefactors were coming from the past life, So eventually, and he's very stubborn. So the sister got so fed up with him, I think. She said, and her mother would try and threaten him. The moon will come down and get you. He didn't care. The spirits will come and get you. He didn't care. He just wanted to get on with the job of carrying on being a meditator. Anyway, finally she goes to the local people, and they do their divinations, and they come up with their findings based on their divinations that yes, indeed, he seems to be truly the reincarnation of the Laudo Lama. So anyway, there's a lovely story he told when he was about 8 years old. He was up in the mountains with his manager. They're very professional, these people. You get turned over to a manager, And he's in that monastery, and there's this big river. And across the other side of the river, this would have been about 1954. There's all these strange-looking people on the other bank. They're pale-faced, pale eyes, straw-coloured hair, white people, Anglos. Sounds like Anglos, So he wanted to meet them. He'd never seen white people before. So there's these rickety bridges, these kind of rope bridges or metal bridges that kind of move, I'll do an advertisement in a minute. Oh, I forgot to bring my postcards, didn't I? No postcards. Oh my gosh. I've got to get postcards. I'll have to ask. Text Harvey or call Harvey and say, I didn't bring any postcards with me. There aren't any here, are there? I left all my postcards somewhere else. Oh my goodness. I had 500 postcards. Sorry, this is me. Sorry, excuse me. Too late. Anyway, I have to give you the advertisements. There's got 2 advertisements. I forgot. I have to give you my advertisements now. Yeah, I'll stop. It's commercial time. Commercial break. I don't know what I've got. Where am I? I left them somewhere. I must have left them in Laguna Beach or New York.
You have to come back.
No, I know it'll be too late because I will. So listen, I've got to give my 2 advertisements now. You can I can send you the ad and you can send to all the people. Okay, so every year since 2000, one advertisement. Every year since 2000, Effie Fletcher in San Francisco, who runs Himalayan High Treks, has been running a pilgrimage to India and Nepal for 3 weeks. Lots of people have been on it. People here have been on it. And we go to all the holy places of India and Nepal. It's just a very special experience, and it raises money for the prison project. That's every year. The next one's in October. And if you want to come, I think there are still places. It's just a special, special experience, I really tell you. If you look up Dharma Journeys, and my name, Dharma Journeys and my name, you'll find it. And every October we do that. India and Nepal. We start in Kathmandu, then we go to the holy places there. We do special practices that Lama Zopa gave us. People just love doing this. It's such a special, special experience. Isn't it, Donna?
Yeah.
Where's Donna? It is, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Okay, who else? Lynn too. So every year, and I've done about 15 of these, and I never get bored. I love going on these pilgrimages. We go to these holy places. People have special experiences, they have special meditations. People bond like you can't believe and just become good friends. And it's just 3 weeks altogether. It's unbelievable. And it raises money for the prison project, which is fantastic. I think $500 goes to, every person goes to the prison project. That's one. Now, since this year, in April, there's now another one. And this is called the Laudo Trek. And it's 15 days. And somebody was going to go up there, up to Lama Zopa's cave, and wanted to raise money for it. So I've never walked up a mountain. I've never walked up any mountain in my life, ever. No hill or mountain. I walked the length of Manhattan. I walked the length of Los Angeles. I walked the length of San Jose, but not a mountain, I'm sorry. But I did. I did in April. I can't tell you. It was the hardest thing I ever did. 4,500 meters, you know. So it's amazing. We start in Kathmandu, go to Courtin for a couple of days. We go to Lukla, then we walk 4 hours a day for 4 days. I mean, the Sherpas do it in 1 day with their 60-kilo packs. We had no packs, and it took us 16 hours, I think, 4 days. But it's a very good experience, and then we spent 6 days up there and did a retreat. It's like 10 below in the snowed one day, but people just loved it. So special. We had a group of 32 people, and then $500 a head goes to Laudo because Lama Zopa's got all these visions of how to develop, and his sister's been running this since like 50 years, since he left. That's Laudo, okay. So this is my commercial. That's a commercial. Okay, I had postcards. I got all postcards printed specially. I forgot. Oh. And the pilgrimages as well. I had millions of them. What did I do with them?
I think you had some on your website too.
I know, but what did I do with them? I left them where I go to so many places I forget. Can you text Kate? Have you got Kate? And ask her, where are they all? Can you send them to me to Land of Medicine Buddha? Overnight them.
Yes.
Please. I left a lot. I left them all. Oh, I can't believe myself. Okay, so never mind. That's the commercial. So the next year's is in March. And then the pilgrimage is every October. And there's still places for this year's pilgrimage. It's so special. I cannot stress it enough how marvellous it is. So that's back to Laudo Lama. Okay, so there's Rinpoche, determined to go on one of these rickety bridges to meet these strange straw-haired, coloured, pale-eyed people. So he did, but he took his bowl of potatoes, because that's what they eat up there, potatoes. So he's walking across the bridge, and and he fell in. He fell in the water. Of course, they don't teach them swimming up there, do they? So he's drowning. So this is the story now. This is my point. He said, the head, his own head, the head kept coming to the surface for air. And he saw his manager walking up and down, freaking out, running up and down the bank, And then he said, the thought occurred to me. The person known as the Laudo Lama is about to die. And then he said, I didn't know anything about emptiness, but there was no fear. So let me explain that. This is Buddha's point. Ego grasping, the root delusion, the most primordial, the deepest lie in the mind, the deepest misconception, the one that is causing us to have all the other misconceptions on the basis of, in this hierarchy, on the basis of ego grasping, like I described yesterday. There is therefore this primordial attachment to get what that fantasy I wants, which is running us like a motor every millisecond, like a maniac, frantic, like a junkie, desperate, frantic. Then on the basis of it's not getting what it wants, which brings anxiety and stress and annoyed and irritated and upset and angry or depression, and that's called, or anger very simply, and then gives rise to jealousy and all the other dramas. There's like this hierarchy. It's more complex than that, but this is fundamental and primordial. So in our culture, we know those words and we think they are natural, meaning you'd be unnatural if you didn't have them. That's what we mean by natural. So there's no psychology in any model that I've heard of that would say you can get rid of them. It would be a bizarre concept to think you could have no anger, no fear, no ego, no jealousy. It's like insanity to say that. But this is the point that Buddha's making. That's what he's found to be so, that we can uproot that ego grasping, that primordial misconception that prevents us from seeing reality as it is, which then brings primordial attachment and craving and grasping, which brings primordial anger and panic and stress and anxiety and fear and drama and the jealousy and all the other rest. All of these, we all have them. They are natural, but he says he has found that they are not at the core of our being. They can be removed. This is a fundamental, simple point that Buddha's making. But we can't hear it so bluntly and so simply. It just sounds like la-di-da spiritual, you know. This is what he's saying. So this ego grasping is instinct for survival, if you like. It's like a sleeping lion most of the time. Check yourself. But as soon as the boyfriend's mean, what arises like a sleeping lion? There's, I did not do that. How dare you say that? I did not have this. Or the pain of the I rising, tortured. Is it not? That's what we call instinct for survival. So the point about Lama Zopa, we can deduce from his behaviour, let's just deduce it now, I'm not asking you to believe it, that he was in fact a highly realised being who had in fact uprooted ego grasping, who had in fact therefore seen emptiness, who did in fact therefore see reality, who therefore did not suffer because they're the cause of suffering. He'd quit suffering. He not only that but had control over his rebirth, and he chose exactly his new mummy, and he died and he went there with control. They say that in this system. This is what this system is talking about. This is what the Buddhist teachings say we can accomplish. That means he's gone beyond ego. Therefore, there is no fear. This is inconceivable to us. So what you could say is, you know, with our view, in order for him to survive, to come to the surface to get air, there has to be this huge, gripping, frantic instinct for survival that causes him to go, oh my God, I've got to fight to survive. So he rises to the surface, panic-stricken to get air, and then he's struggling and fierce to stay out of the water. So then we think, well, if he doesn't have that, he would sink to the bottom of the river like a stone and go, oh, well, I'm dying, what the hell? That's the only option we have, isn't it? In our way we conceive of this. Nonsense, Buddha says. So if we can deduce that he did in fact not have ego, because he's gone beyond ego grasping, he sees reality as it is, therefore there's no fear, as mad as that sounds to us, that's the point that Buddha's making, therefore he was observing exactly what was happening as it's happening. His mind would not have been disturbed, but he would have done whatever's appropriate to get him out of the water. You don't have to have fear to survive. It's called common sense. So if he didn't drown, if he didn't survive and he were drowning, he wouldn't have had fear. This is too hard for us to conceptualize. I think we can talk about ordinary people with ordinary experiences. We can have a traumatic thing happen and you get more clearer. I'm not trying to show off in any way here, but I always quote the example of when I was held up in New York by a gunman. Believe me, I haven't realised emptiness. I promise you. But I remember I became more clear. And then I started arguing with this ridiculous man and started being very logical. He had a gun right here. Give me your money, he said. It was a comedy, actually. My sister had a glass of wine. She was into stealing still. We'd come out of this Irish bar. This is back in the mid-'70s, and we'd just come from being radical lefties in London. You know, and then she still hadn't given up the habit of stealing yet, so she's had this glass of wine. We're walking home at 2 a.m, downtown Manhattan in 1974. And there's suddenly this dude comes out of nowhere, puts a gun in between my breasts and says, give me your money, bitch, right? So all I remember is him saying that, and he's like this close to me, you know. So suddenly fear comes first, and then logic takes over. My bossy part takes over. Logic. And I was thinking, but this is absurd. We're poor, you know. So I started giving him a lecture. You know, and I won't say all the rude words I said, but who the fuck you are? I said, how dare you? How dare you? I said, we're just as poor as you. You give us your money. It was so logical to me, you know. It was so absurd that he should want my money. So I think he was quite shocked. You can imagine. We had English-sounding voices, and Americans, if you hear an English-sounding voice, you get confused, you know. Must be posh or something. So there is this maniac. And then Janet, my sister Janet, same Janet, she said, hey, brother, have some wine. Hey, brother, have some wine. And he couldn't believe it. He said, I don't want some wine, I want your money, you know. It was like ridiculous. So I refused. Janet kept saying, give him your money. I said, no, you give us your money. We're as poor as you. I was giving you a lecture. And I really didn't dislike him. I liked him. I didn't mind. I knew he was more scared than me. That's a fact. He couldn't believe it. So in the end, he shrugged and walked away. What could he do, the poor guy, you know? Now, my point is this. What I learned from it is this. There was no fear. Therefore, I didn't suffer. Can you hear that, people? I didn't plan it to be that way. I'm not trying to be clever. But because there was no fear, I was clear. I didn't suffer. It was crystal clear. In fact, it's like my party story. You all laugh when I tell you, you know. Do you understand? That's what I got from that. And that's Buddha's point. That all delusions are the voices of ego grasping. They're like pathetic, insane, demented, fear, panic-stricken infants. And because ego only wants what it wants, and it can't cope with anything that doesn't fit that. But when you've got wisdom is what you get when you've got rid of all the delusions. And what you come with wisdom is bliss and clarity and fearlessness, literally. This is not how we think of the mind in our culture. This is Buddha's view. Are we communicating here? Well, that's a bit encouraging, isn't it? That we can go beyond fear? I mean, good Lord. So, Mr. Thingamy is right, Darwin, but he took it as a given that they have to be there. But Buddha says, no, don't be ridiculous. In fact, if you analyse it, surely, that situation, it turned out okay, you know. I wouldn't have planned, I wouldn't have written a script, I wouldn't advise people to do that if you get held up with a gun. But it happened, it worked out, it worked out, it worked well, it happened, it worked. Do you understand what I'm saying? Kind of intuitive maybe, it worked, luckily. But the fact is, it was right, it worked. And there wasn't fear, it wasn't coming from fear, it wasn't coming from panic, it wasn't coming from instinct for survival at all. Do you understand me? Do you hear me?
Well, Robina, this episode happened, you were already a Buddhist.
No, I wasn't a nun then. I was 32. I was an old radical lesbian separatist hippie or something, I was still a political activist. It's my nature. It's my personality, Donna. This is my nature, darling. I was 30. No, how old was I? 1974. I was 30 in New York City. I was still I remember I had this very nice Indian pink jacket on. He was like stone, He's like this. His face is right here. And in the end of it, it was very kind of. I liked him. He was quite a nice boy. I liked him. He was a nice guy, but he wasn't. But he was more nervous than me. That was clear. And so then in the end, he just sort of ran his finger down like that, very gently, and then he wandered off into the night with his gun. So I was not a Buddhist by any means. No. It's my personality more than anything, Donna. Because
I'm glad that's clarified, because what was going through my mind is that you were also making the point that this growth of wisdom, which diminished your fear. And
No, nothing to do with that. It was just my personality, just how I am, But it's what I learned from it. I learned that from it. Since I've got the Buddhist view now, I can see that from it. I've learned that from it. There happened not to be fear. Or you could say that the fear turned into sort of like something. So there was no, but at the end of it, there was no fear. And actually, you think about it, it's because I won. I dominated him. He probably got very upset. Do you understand? So I think part of the fear we have when we're harmed by others is because we lose all power and we become victims. That's the worst pain for us. I wasn't the victim. I walked away triumphant. Do you understand what I'm saying? Speaking like ego, I was triumphant. I won, I controlled him. He did what I wanted. He got no money. Do you understand? Yeah. That's what I think about it like that. Actually, it happened in Delhi as well. All the beggars, when you're stopping, you drive the car, and all the guys come up and want their. I got so fed up. I said, "Give me your rupees," and he did. He gave me a rupee, and I didn't give it back. I kept the rupee. It was very funny. So anyway, ego grasping. Ego grasping is what they call it in Buddhism, and so the point is, it's got this function of being intense in its nature. This is the root delusion. This is the one that's primordially root delusion, such that when that is eradicated from the mind, that's liberation. That's when we finally have achieved our liberation from suffering and its causes. There's more work to do, but that's where we're getting, and that's why you've got to get to the very subtle level of your mind through concentration, meditation, to do that level of work. It's really primordially deep. And it cannot be uprooted until you've got single point of concentration. Lama Yeshe in his wonderful Mahamudra book talks about this, you know. You've got to get to the subtle level of your mind to unpack these deeply primordial neuroses from the mind. Are we communicating? So you work on the branch delusions, attachment and anger, the day-to-day ones, you know, that are themselves primordially deep anyway. So, okay. So what's karma got to do with loosening the grip of ego grasping? All right. Okay. So, like I'm saying, one way of entering into Buddhism is through the doorway of getting our minds to be in sync with reality, with how things are. I know that concept sounds abstract. What do you mean, how things are? Never mind, don't worry about it. That's the plan, that's the idea. There's one approach to it. So what Buddha's saying is this ego grasping and the attachment and aversion and the other neuroses in the mind, their key function is that they cause us to not be in sync with reality, meaning these neuroses make up stories. So as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, these delusions, again, two main synonyms that describe, that indicate the characteristics of these neuroses. One is that they're disturbing. That's evident. Check the last time you were jealous, depressed, anxious. It's evident they are disturbing right there to us, the very having of them. Second, they're delusional. And this in English is a great word. I've noticed in other languages like Spanish, Italian, German, Greek, there's not a really good equivalent. And so because it's seen as a religious word, there's all these wacky, weird translations of it. But delusion is such a direct and marvelous meaning. So you know very well, if someone accuses you of being delusional, you'd be very insulted because they're telling you that you're not in touch with reality. We get that phrase, don't we? Not in touch with reality. So in other words, let's say Urs is cheating on me, rampantly cheating. Again. But I'm as blind as a bat because I'm so full of attachment. I'm living in complete denial. And because he's all seductive and lovely, he's telling me he loves me and he adores me. And I believe it because I'm so frantic to believe it. But everybody else can see he's cheating on me. You get my point now. We know this kind of thing. A mother who's so attached to her boy. But there he is cheating and lying and stealing and she thinks he's a saint. We know that she can't see truth. We get this concept, don't we? That when you've got a fantasy about something, you can't see reality. So that's all Buddha is saying, except his view of reality goes to a way more subtle level, that's all. But the principle is clear. So as Lama Zopa says, all these delusions, ego grasping, attachment, aversion, depression, anxiety, you name them. That's how you put it. It's so tasty. What they do is, when they're in the mind, when they're prevailing, they decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that aren't there. We can hear this. We understand this. It's obvious just for the chocolate cake. what these delusions do, their key function is they embellish reality. They add on top of reality extra bells and whistles. They cause us to see more than there really is there. So attachment to chocolate cake, we know this is what it does. It exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake. It exaggerates the function of the cake in relation to its happiness. It exaggerates many things. And of course, that's what you do with your boyfriend. Attachment over-exaggerates, sometimes grotesquely, his beautiful qualities. And we know this, although it sounds embarrassing and depressing, because when we are in love, it feels so divine. So it seems cruel of Buddha to say it's a delusion. Do you understand? The happiness is not delusion. Don't misunderstand. The interesting thing about attachment and all these states of mind is dealt with in incredible depth in the Vajrayana. Very fascinating. The way these different states of mind function and how they actually cause us to experience certain things. So it is true when attachment is rampant, it has this particular relationship with certain wind energies in the body, which is why it triggers very delicious feelings. It's not contradicted. And you don't have to chuck that one out to chuck out the lie. And that's hard for us to hear. So attachment is a lie that exaggerates his deliciousness, that exaggerates his role in making me happy. That's why I become like this vampire. And why we have this attachment is because I am nothing on my own. Attachment means you're nothing and you're nobody. The more I am feeling dissatisfied, which is the energy of the attachment, the more I'm nothing. Therefore, the more I crave something. And therefore, the more attachment fantasizes the role he'll have in making me full and happy. That's why when we're very attached and don't have much good qualities, we're like a vampire. And so I'll eat him up for breakfast. And then when he doesn't do what my attachment wants, I will kill him. Or, or chuck him out, spit him out and get another one. You kind of get my point. So we're living in these lies all the time. It's not just occasionally. They pervade our mind to one degree or another, Buddha says. And that's why these are such an internal process. You don't discover this by looking at the brain, believe me. You discover this by going inside, not in some hippie-trippy way, but in a super clear way, in the way these amazing Hindus invented this technique and the way the Buddha uses that technique. That's the basis. This clarity that you get from concentration, and then you use that to do this inner work of unpacking and unraveling and identifying the contents of this mind of ours. Are we communicating? We start to recognize literally that they're liars. Literally, attachment is an exaggerating liar. And then, of course, because attachment wants only what I want, then the second he stops fulfilling that, then aversion arises, annoyed, irritated, upset, or anxious, or stressed, or angry, or depressed, depending on your personality. And it's all based in fear and panic. Look at our lives. So we have fear and panic, not because Earth is doing this. We have fear and panic because we have attachment and aversion and delusions. He is doing what he's doing. That doesn't mean it's not a catalyst for my suffering, but the suffering is mine. The delusions are mine. So when we can see the way we function when these states of mind are running the show, we're not discussing the good qualities in us. We haven't even gone there. We're trying to identify the weeds, Then we're going to see how they cause us intense suffering and their nature is to grasp and to grip onto I. Their nature is to grasp at I. That's their job, is to grasp at I and what I want. That's what they will do. And when you see really terrible people, I'm not being rude now, look at other people. Look at people who are brutal and unkind and selfish and deluded or rapists or terrorists or addicted to whatever. We naturally are totally I-based. Absolutely rampant I-based. They will do anything to get what I want. That's the suffering of them. So our trouble is, ironically, because we also have kindness and love and compassion and generosity, and we're not running around being multi-rapists. It's harder to see these states of mind because we think, we're nice people. I don't rape, I don't kill, I'm a good person. It's true, we have the good qualities, but what we don't realize is that these delusions are polluting our good qualities and dragging us down. So that's why we have to be very insightful in unpacking and unraveling our own minds. So the nature of all the delusions is I-based and frantic and grasping, and therefore fear. So by Now, so the other component is this. So if I then have the philosophical view that I didn't ask to get born, that it's not my fault, that everything is always somebody else's fault, I'm this innocent victim, and you look at how ego thinks, and that's how it thinks. And we will do everything in our power to get off the hook and to not blame ourselves because it's too painful. So always everybody else. The world is like that. And I'm not saying people don't do bad things. I'm not saying that. But so ego naturally, and then we reinforce that fear and because I am really an innocent victim, because I really didn't ask to get born. I don't recall my mother and father consulting me first. Right. Think of my meaning. Suddenly you're out in the world, you don't know what the hell's going on, your mother and father chuck you out, and they tell you that they made you. You don't think of any past, you don't, there's nothing like that, and of course you're an innocent victim. Now you start to hear about karma. Wow. I brought my own stuff with me. This is my anger. This is my love. This is my kindness. And my mummy hurts me. That must be due to what actions I did. And my mother's kind to me. Wow, that's due to my virtuous actions. Suddenly you become more involved in your life. You're a participant in your life, not a victim. You know, the way the victim mentality is, you look in your bank and you say, how dare there be no dollars in my bank? I deserve dollars. That's what ego says. We think we deserve good things to happen and we don't deserve bad. That's an absolute default 100% assumption that we carry in our mind without ever questioning. It's demented. That's like saying, I deserve dollars. You know that's absurd because you know the presence of dollars in your bank is dependent on the work you've done. They're your dollars and you create the causes for those dollars. And then when you see those dollars, you can treasure those dollars because you know you worked hard. Can you hear the point? It's like looking in your garden. How dare, who put weeds in my garden? You're going to say, how dare there be weeds in my garden? I don't deserve weeds. We think like that when it comes to our lives of suffering and happiness. And we believe it's true that, you know, excuse me, I deserve flowers. Well, you better grow them, Buddha says. You deserve dollars? Yeah, work and you'll get the dollars. So we don't think of it in a heavy way, we just think it's normal. Well, that's what he's saying about happiness and suffering. Happiness is a fruit of your past virtue. Suffering is a fruit of your past non-virtue. It's so simple. Dollars are the fruit of your past work, non-dollars. I mean, okay, people can steal your dollars. Forget all that. You get my point, though. So life is our garden, Buddha says. And what happens in it, who you're born to, whom you see, the cockroaches, the rats, the humans, the beautiful environment, the ugly environment, the bank that won't give you credit, the person that gives you $1 million, whatever is out there, whomever you meet, whatever they do to you, however they see you, whatever happens, every millisecond, everything in that garden, you sowed it. You sowed it. You're experiencing the fruits of your past gardening. Our life is like that, Buddha says. Now, naturally, it's going to loosen the grip of ego grasping because you're going to own it. Yeah, it's my weeds, what a drag, but I pull my sleeves up and pull them out. Instead of, how dare there be weeds in my garden, who did it? And spend your life trying to sue somebody. They're your weeds. You take control of them. You're happy, you know you can pull your weeds out. Yeah, they're your weeds, what a drag, but you can pull them out. Yes, it's your happiness. Wow, amazing, these beautiful flowers. Look at the veggies, how fantastic my hard work, and you rejoice and delight, and you grow more. But if you think you're an innocent victim and you didn't ask to get born, then somebody better put dollars in my bank and somebody better pull out my weeds. How dare they? I mean, that's the childish view ego has. So understanding karma is a great way to loosen the grip of ego grasping. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Okay. And the fact is, speaking philosophically now, one way of framing all these teachings when it comes to the wisdom level, we start to, this is all the junior school stuff, and we get to where it leads us, is to now really get our heads around how to articulate how things do exist. And that's now the framework for that is the best way to present that is the two truths. How things exist conventionally and how things exist ultimately. We start to unpack that. That's where this stuff really comes into play for us. So shorthand for how things exist ultimately is the word emptiness. Shorthand for how the things exist conventionally is dependent arising. So the way things exist interdependently, the way things exist conventionally, is things exist interdependently. It's a cute word, simple, but it's dealt with incredibly subtle detail at different levels in Buddhist philosophy and has great meaning. Not just the vague word interdependent. It's spelt out precisely at many levels. And so there's this relationship between the conventional and the ultimate. And so as Lama Yeshe puts it, dependent arising, which is a shorthand for interdependence or conventional reality, is the king of logics, as Lama would put it, to prove emptiness. So it's putting these two together that is so tasty, and we can start to do that. 2:30, 3 o'clock, 4. Okay, so any questions first before what we've done so far? Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned about the grasping beyond going, grasping the ego. You know, it sounds like a very complex topic. So
It is.
I was wondering, like, how do we find the balance between going beyond the ego while we are also living in the world?
Yes, exactly. Of course, that's right. Totally. That's the whole job. That's the job. And so, of course, you know, you're like asking, how can I distinguish between a herb and a herb and a weed, isn't it? It's that we're getting to a more sophisticated level now. So, you know, in the beginning, if you don't know botany, if you look at the garden, it's a bunch of overgrown green stuff. You can't tell one bit from another. You can maybe tell a rose from a something else. But when it gets to the more subtle stuff, like the weeds and the herbs all underneath growing together, unless you know botany, it's impossible to see the difference, isn't it? So your question's like that. How do you learn to get the balance? Or how do you distinguish between virtue and non-virtue, between a negative action, a positive action, between grasping and wanting something? That's the subtlety of all this stuff, which you have to only can learn to do by learning it all. Do you see? There's no trick. The more you understand botany, the more that informs your ability to distinguish between a herb and a weed. So the more we understand Buddhist psychology, this model, the more we understand the dependent arising and emptiness, which I'm going to talk about now, the more we understand karma. These are all the nuts and bolts of this particular worldview, which is what you need to study in order to inform you to do this job every day.
I'm wondering, like, is it possible, or is it, like, in the society we are in, is it even conducive in a certain social circle? Or
I can't quite hear you, sweetheart.
like, is it
Wish you had a microphone, because otherwise the tube's used. We're not on a computer. So. Sorry, darling, go again.
I'm just wondering, like, in a society we are living in, very materialistic.
That's right.
How do we do that?
Well, that's my point. I repeat my answer. I know you want me to give you a quick answer,
Right.
but you can't hear my answer. It's like you're asking me how, I have to repeat to you. You're asked, how do I navigate a garden full of weeds and herbs? How do I distinguish? You've got to learn botany, don't you? Would you agree with that?
Right.
Well, I'm sort of talking here the same. I don't want to just throw off your question. Your question's perfect. But that's why the more you know your mind, the more you understand what a delusion is, the more you understand the difference between the delusions and the virtues in your own mind, first by studying it, the more you understand karma. That's all the nuts and bolts of the Buddha's view. And if you want to be serious Buddhist, to answer that question, you'd have to learn all that stuff and then you apply it. And it enriches the way you see things and understand things. It's this process. It's possible. That's the point. Of course it's possible. I'm just giving you a general answer. Okay? But maybe we can be more specific as time goes. We'll see what happens. Yes, someone else. I saw a hand. Yes. Well, I can't see. Where? Who?
I understand him very well.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for us normal people to live such a nice life. Is it easier for you in a monastery when you live behind?
Honey, I don't live in a monastery. Jesus, God, Wolfgang, I don't want you to believe where I live. I live in aeroplanes in big cities, in New York City and San Jose and Los Angeles. I don't live anywhere. I sleep around, honey, in 70 beds a year. I don't live in a monastery. I'm like you. I'm a normal person like you who has, you know. Listen, again, it's the same answer. I know the question, but I don't think he's hearing the answer.
But I also have a question.
Yeah, okay.
How can I be thankful?
Thankful?
Yeah.
What for?
If for such a nice life.
Okay, good question. So good. This is the usual. Good, Wolfgang. Good point. So that we say that we're full of gratitude and thank. So I'm not being rude now, but let's look at the historical framework of that concept. It's coming from the concept that God made you, that God gave you a good life. I'm not criticizing this view. So gratitude and thankfulness to God is an incredibly powerful quality. Well, look, we're not talking God here, and Buddha is not saying he has any role at all in you having a good life. So secondly, you can also be grateful to your parents, and that's still not wrong if your parents are loving and kind. But the real one you want to be grateful to is the hard work in the past. Your hard work. If you look in your garden now and you look at it, you don't say, oh, I'm so grateful for the cauliflowers, because you've worked hard the last 20 years gardening and weeding every day, sowing seeds, nourishing. You are grateful to your own hard work, are you not? You created that garden. Same here. So you don't say, I'm great. You do say, I'm grateful, but the action point. Okay, saying you're grateful is very kind, but what's the action to come from that? Nothing. But if you say, wow, this garden is the fruit of my unbelievable hard work. Do I like veggies? Yep. Do I like roses? Yep. Then I better grow more, baby. That's the action to come from it. So you continue to grow your roses and you continue to pull out your weeds, because you know that as long as you live, and if you don't live in this life and next life, you're going to, whatever you get, whatever the garden is in 20 years or 20 lifetimes will be the one that you grow now. That's the action point from karma. Gratitude is lovely, but you just sit on it and think, oh, aren't I lucky? I'm so grateful to the universe. That's kind of like a hubris. It's like arrogance almost, because you're not seeing any cause for it. Do you see my point?
I'm grateful.
So action point. Action is what? What's the action from there?
Do
To keep doing it.
good things.
To keep, if you like the life you've got, kind people, money in the bank, a job, intelligence, every atom of that is the fruit of your phenomenal virtue. So keep doing those same things. That's all. That's the conclusion from it. Then it's an action, not a hubris. Oh, aren't I lucky? That's an arrogance almost. Do you see my point? Do you?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Yeah.
So, based on
Ah.
that, I've been curious about, is it beneficial to dedicate that past?
Okay, that's this. Yeah, dedicate is this. All it's a practice, right? All dedication means is you finish your weeding, you finish growing the flowers, you're exhausted from a hard day of work in the garden, and you remind yourself, finish at the end, oh, why did I grow this garden? Because when the veggies grow, I'm going to share them with everybody. That's dedication. Yeah, of course. That's altruism. That's the reason.
You've spoken about your good karma, like pissing it away.
That's right.
Talked about that.
That's right.
So, like, I notice all the great things in our lives, and
Yeah.
it is, instead of just saying, "Oh, that's so I'm so grateful,"
That's right.
you can beneficially.
Honey, keep it simple. It's your garden. So you know very well. Okay, Harvey, whom I'm staying with just down the road, he's got one of those community gardens, got a little plot in the community garden, you know. He loves his community garden. So gardening is a great analogy. It's so dynamic. It's so obvious that the work you do produces the results. You see it so vividly. And he knows if he doesn't go for 1 week, all he can think of is this what do you call it? The fruit. Honeydew melons are going to be fading, and he's anxious. He's got to get down there and nourish his honeydew melons and pick his tomatoes. It's a dynamic thing because you see things changing vividly. So it's the fruit of his past work, and when he goes there, he sees it. He's so happy to see his delicious veggies, but then he picks them and he grows more. It's a dynamic thing. If you just thought you were lucky, you'd say, oh, aren't I lucky? You eat up all the tomatoes, eat up all the honeydew melons, and suddenly one day you go down the garden, oh, there's nothing left. How dare there's no fruit in my garden? That's greed and self-centeredness.
I understand that. I'm just wondering if it's beneficial then to take the fruits and vegetables and
What?
take your fruits and vegetables and.
That's what I just said. That's what I just said. What else would you do with fruits and veggies but eat them? You wouldn't leave them there to rot.
No, I don't mean eat them myself. I mean.
But that's what, as I said before, that's what dedication is if you have the altruistic one.
That's what I meant.
The altruistic view. We're looking here, karma is not about altruism. Karma right now is for ourselves to comprehend. When we add bodhicitta to it, then you add that one. Of course, darling, absolutely, absolutely. But you've got to first know it for yourself. You've got to know the advantage of having cauliflowers for yourself. and want to do it for yourself. Don't think that's selfish. All it means is you're taking responsibility and knowing that you grow your own cauliflowers. They're not a gift. And then you add compassion to it. And it's not only for you, but for others as well. That comes second. Do you understand? Do you understand? Okay. Okay, so I don't know where to go to emptiness or not. I'm not sure. We can try to go to emptiness and see where we go. All right. Have a tea break. I'll eat my cake. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about emptiness. Come on, 15-minute tea break while I eat my cake.